semi form of Druidism, or almost a sort of a nice, neat follow-on from Druidism. British Israelite books will always tell you that Druids were just so welcoming and so happy to have the these Christians arrive, and that many Druids went on to become Christians and all of this kind of thing. And you'll even see this picked up in a lot of movies. And it's utter nonsense. It's utter propaganda. Nothing could be further from the truth. And anybody who's done 5 minutes of homework will know that the Romans literally slaughtered en masse the Druids, not just in Ireland, but also in Wales and Scotland and England and also in France. Wherever they found them, they annihilated them. Bards were a whole race of people that were put to the sword in a matter of months. We're talking in extremely short periods of time. Colossal violence was perpetrated. Then another form of violence, the ideological form of violence, of burning the books. St. Patrick started work on that right away. He wasn't in Ireland more than a month before he'd already started burning books. So this is the old colonialization we talked about in previous shows.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing that's going on today. It has relevance today because, none of this would matter. Not one thing about what we're talking about would matter. My book would be utterly meaningless if it didn't have consequences for today.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can clinch that today. In this show, I really want to hope that we can clinch this idea of making it absolutely clear to people, as I do in talks and classes and lectures and things. But it's very, very important for people again to understand how important ancient history is in a modern context.
I agree.
Because we are talking about people who have not just slaughtered and raped and mutilated. We're talking about plagiarists. People really need to get familiar with what that word means. It's the appropriation of the gnosis and the knowledge that then they claim has been burned or been lost. And again, just to emphasize this whole thing is that people need to understand that colonialization, conquest, is basically two forms of that. When a predator, when a colonialist or a empire is spreading, it really has two forms of attack. We're always familiar with the violent form of attack. Literally armed guards, armies, mercenaries moving in with the sword. The Battle of Culloden, or the conquest of the Native American Indians, or the British taking over, the India, or we're always familiar with that. Where like the Boer War, where Britain, was fighting the Dutch for the seizure of the land.
Yeah.
But of course, the real reason why they were doing that is because they wanted the gold mines.
All the resources
that the Boers legally had rights to in the Transvaal, right down in South Africa. So this is no news to those people whose forefathers fought in the Boer War. It's always about land grabbing and territory grabbing, and I want to make absolutely clear that that's exactly the same thing that happened in the prehistory of Ireland. But never forget that there's two wings to this sort of vulture of empire building. You send in the troops and you eradicate, but that is only the very first action. The next action is a much more prolonged action, and that is to do with suppression, gradual suppression, supplanting, right? Appropriation of the knowledge, ideological indoctrination.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Fabian way, of modern day politics was already going on thousands of years ago. What they call the war of attrition, a very slow, gradual process of war. It's no less violent, but it's a war on the language, on the tradition, on the customs, on the culture, on the behavior of people, so that they become utterly foreign. And then they have Stockholm syndrome. They literally now start identifying with the oppressor, because the oppressor is literally so strong, so powerful, so capable, so moneyed, that you start to emulate their way. They literally are the kings on the hills. The hill. You're the villager. They are the elites. And they structure the towns and the societies. You have no free will. And so they've subdued you and they've globalized you in your mind.
Yeah.
And this is no different than it's happening exactly in today's world as it is happening, as it began to happen thousands of years ago. It's the same families that are doing it, basically. Same descendants.
Interesting. And I guess we could begin also to talk here about the different waves of visitation that came to Ireland. And I guess we can even tie this back even to the Atlantean days, right?
It all goes back to that. My book is part two of my work on Atlantis. It's a follow-on of the Atlantis book. In fact, I had to sort of do the Atlantis book first in order to get to this subject matter. This is the subject matter I'm really concerned about, which is the spreading of the elements of civilization that I believed happened from the west to the east. And I wanted to deconstruct. That's my work. My work falls under alternative history because I want to deconstruct the myth, the lie that the elements of civilization spread from the east to the west. But most of these, all Irish mythology, British mythology, if you read it, all absolutely confirms the fact that Britain, meaning England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, you see, and all the islands off the shores were remnants of Atlantean culture. In fact, some of the most astounding writings about Atlantis don't come from Plato. And again, this is another misnomer that the finest works on Atlantis, are to be found amongst the Greeks.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on here with this. The greatest commentary on the pre-Diluvian era is actually to be found in Irish mythology. And it's sad that I'm one of the only people that actually deals with this, in a big way. I mean, others have written on it to a certain extent, but the legends are full of it. And one of the most intriguing things that they talk about is the waves of invasion or the waves of visitation. Whether you believe that Ireland, England were remnants of Atlantis, or that the Atlanteans, after the deluge, after the flood, arrived on Ireland, is up to you. There's different theories there, but there was basically several waves. They claim that there was the Fomorian race, and my book explains who they are, the original inhabitants of this area, and they're always described as sort of giant-like, or even hybrid-like, deformed.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The Fomori, they're called, and Fomori is a word that actually means the giants, the great ones. These are sort of like your Greek titans, or the Cyclopean beings.
Sheesh.
That all mythology talks about, especially the Scandinavian mythologies also speak about these kinds of beings that have, just a lot of weird features, that they seem to be crossbred between animals and human beings.
The Jotun or Jotun, I think, is one.
Yeah, this
Nordic.
is in Nordic, yeah, of course. And you just have the great giants. All the high legends of the world talk about this type of being, especially in Jason and the Argonauts. You see all the trials of Odysseus or what have you. All the heroes. Hercules meets these strange beings, hybrid beings. Well, this is what Irish mythology also talks about. And then there's meant to be a biblical tie-in with the next wave, which is actually a woman, a granddaughter of Noah, and her name was Kasser. I'm not saying I believe in all these, waves of invasion. A lot of this is spurious.
But they're out there. They're myths.
Yeah,
right?
These are legitimate myths, that talk about visitations in the earliest times. Then there's a people called the children of Partholan. This is the third wave, a hero, a king, who brought a small group of people to colonize Ireland again after the flood. And these are people who were torn by the flood, you see, and decimated by the flood, and they were trying to survive it. Then after that comes a related group called the children of Nemed, after the king Nemed, and they claim that's about 3000 BC. The dates are highly spurious, could have been a lot earlier.
Sure.
Then after Nemed's children, the people of Nemed, they were all destroyed by plague. And then there's a more traditionally accepted group called the Iberians. This word Iberia is a very important word because it may in fact be the root of the word Hiberia or Hiberu. Right? The Iberu. In fact, one of the ancient names of Ireland is Iberia.
Yeah.
One of the ancient names of Spain is Hiberia with an H on the beginning.
All right.
Yeah. So the very word Iberian is very interesting. But the Iberians were 3 separate tribes under the same heading.
Okay.
Of which the most important tribe was being a group called the Fir Bolg. And the Fir Bolg, people have had trouble translating that term. It actually really means the men of wisdom.
Okay.
The Fir Bolg are the elite group within the Iberians, and these are settlers in Ireland. And the Firbolg, the Iberians are the longest reigning inhabitants of all these waves, until, of course, you come to the historical age where men,
The last
mortals,
wave here.
until down to the present day.
Yeah.
God knows how long they're going to be around, but before that, in the prehistoric, or what they call the mythological cycle, the Iberians were the longest running. And they had power. They were magicians. Many of the ancient sites that you'll go and visit, and you'll see standing in Ireland, date from these so-called Firbolgs and so on. So
interesting.
they're a very important group, and I write about them in the book, in the first chapters of book 1. Then comes a supremely important and highly mysterious group of people who are known as the Tuatha Dé Danann, right, or the Tuatha Dé Danann. That's Gaelic for the tribe of the goddess Danu, and they are absolutely fundamental to study, because they're a smaller group but of very powerful magicians and magi who make up a very important group. We could spend, 10 shows just on mythologies connecting to these guys.
Sheesh.
And especially the mythology that they bring with them absolutely stipulates that they came from 4 islands that were drowned in a great cataclysm. No question about it. They're even mentioned. In fact, one of the lands that they claim they came from in Gaelic is called Murias,
All right.
right? Which, if you add an L to the beginning of that word, L apostrophe, you get Lemurias, right?
That's
Or
right.
Lemuria.
Yeah.
So, we're looking into the most ancient of all mythologies, of the most ancient cultures on Earth. And there, within the word roots, you see, within the philology, is confirmation that there were not just one drowned island, but many.
Many.
And one of them is Muria, which is the motherland.
And many people came from these drowned islands in different
survivors.
waves. Yeah.
And the Tuatha Dé Danann especially are, tremendously endowed spiritually. And they make up what would be considered in all Irish mythology and all Irish history, when Irish people are talking about the gods, that's who they're talking about. They're talking about this group known as the Tuatha Dé Danann, the great magi, who were tall and blonde and blue-eyed, you see, very similar to what the people on the west side, in the Americas talk about as the survivors of these great cataclysms, the men of wisdom who came, you see. So this is an important group. Then they were supplanted by a group called the Milesians, or the children of Mil, King Mil. It's just like our word for mile, M-I-L-E, or M-I-L. And these are basically the mortals. In the historical cycle, these are considered the mortals. And this group is very important in my work, because I have tied these people back to the Atenists.
Yeah.
And for people who haven't the faintest idea what that means, the Atenists is a very important group of Egyptian sun priests that we've been talking about in these shows, and I deal with, in great detail in the book, who were basically started by Pharaoh Akhenaten. And again, most people think that this chap was, just the greatest thing that Egypt ever produced, and that he was the grandfather of monotheism, that he is basically the Christ before the Christ, the Moses before the Moses. Not even the Moses before the Moses. There's many authors out there who think he was Moses.
Yeah, that's right.
I do. I believe he was Moses. Sigmund Freud thought that Moses was definitely involved with the court of Akhenaten. Ralph Ellis believes that Moses may have been the brother of Akhenaten, you see. And I speculate that he was Akhenaten. No doubt about it. That he either was Akhenaten, or he was undoubtedly a very, very senior lieutenant, general, minister of Atenism, which is the worship of one god, the worship of the sun god. But the thing we have to clear up, though, is that these guys had major rivals in Egypt. The Atenists were not sun worshippers. They were sort of a distorted form of sun worship, because sun worship had been going on in Egypt for millennia.
Yeah.
We can date sun worship back to 3,000 years BC, and I think that's a preposterous date to start Egypt. If you listen to people like John Anthony West and his mentor Swallow the Lubitsch, you're talking about going back 18,000 years, 25,000 years, dating the Sphinx and what have you. So if this is to be believed, and I believe it's true, then going back at least 18,000 years, and still that is conservative, sun worship is going. The first sun temples are in Saqqara and in what would be called Upper Egypt, closer to Nubia, closer to Sudan. And the mountains of Sudan were considered so spiritual, so mystical. And the reason is because that's where the Nile comes from. Like all rivers, rivers start in the mountains and flow downwards. So the Sudan was considered the realm of the gods to all Egyptians. In fact, the most sacred burial grounds were in that area, in the
Right.
passing through Nubia, where the Nile started to rise, where the Nile began. There's mountainous areas there, and of course this was all flooded in more recent times. The government of Egypt, with British help, of course, these areas have all been flooded. So all of these graves and tombs, you see, and all their contents have been purposely flooded so that we won't know what's going on. But you see, one archaeologist, I think his name was Davies, he got in there just as the Aswan Dam was going to be flooded, and he tried to excavate some of these tombs. You know, the information is in my book. And what does he find but blonde Caucasian?
How about that?
Yeah, beings that were unbelievably sophisticated. And going by the relics that he discovered, he was absolutely convinced in his mind that these people were the builders of the pyramid. Just from looking at the technology. So pre-dynastic corpses were found in these reaches of the Upper Nile. It's actually called Upper Egypt, you see. And they were all Caucasians, Western, blue-eyed, tall men, the same kind of skeletons that have been found in as far as China, you know, and now New Zealand. The same beings. And he referred to them, realizing that the books of Egypt speak about these people as being the Shamsu Hor, or the disciples of Horus.
Yeah.
And I've got a chapter in the book called The Disciples of Horus, which goes into all of these incredible finds. But to cut a long story short, the connections here to the ancient times, solar worship had been going on for a long, long time. Atonism began in the 18th dynasty, which is incredibly late. You know, and okay, just because a lot of TV shows and a lot of books focus on Akhenaten in the 18th dynasty, don't ever for a minute think that that's all there is to Egypt.
Yeah.
In fact, to be quite serious with you, that was a kind of a late phenomena. It was also a very warped phenomena, because it was solar worship of a specific kind. I actually call it the dark side of the sun, worship of the dark side of the sun. But more importantly is that this Akhenaten, he and his Atonists were finally expelled from Egypt after about the 17th year of his despotic, tyrannical reign. He's a megalomaniac in my eyes. Finally, Egypt just got fed up with him. And this is the most tolerant civilization on earth. Finally just couldn't take it anymore. You see, a certain general called Hiram-Heb had to, you know, stand up and do the unthinkable, which is seize the throne for him. So something was considered unthinkable because the pharaoh was a god.
Yeah.
So to usurp the god wasn't something that Egyptians just did as a matter of course. It wasn't like over here where you just, you know, every 5 minutes there's some scandal, you know. There it was like, you know, you're usurping the god of Egypt, the man who's the embodiment of the gods. So you can imagine to what lengths these people of Egypt have been pushed in order to get rid of Akhenaten and his Atonists and restore what is known as Amonism.
Yeah.
Right? Or the Amonist priests, who the Atonists always had rivalry with. And Amen is like the word we say at the end of the prayers, Amen, Amen Ra, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the Amonists had been from 25,000 years, but, you know, 18,000 years. They're the oldest group. And the god Amen Ra was worshipped, you know, for millennia. For millennia. Now, whether you know, I'm not going to get into who was good, who was bad, you know. In my eyes, the Atonists were the ones who had the problems. But I leave that to people's own, you know, research. The most important thing to realize is that these Atonists, during the time that they had risen in Egypt, were very, very friendly with Cretans.
Okay.
Because the Atonists that we're talking about were actually, majority of them were known as the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. Right?
Yeah.
There's no question about this. People have not identified Akhenaten and his, you know, fathers as Hyksos, but in my mind, I think they are. And Ralph Ellis has gone a long way to show that this, in fact, could be true.
Yeah.
He doesn't say it as clearly either, but he's saying that this kind of solar worship that we're talking about seems to have arisen amongst the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. These characters, these Hyksos, and I also believe Akhenaten and his gang, were very, very, you know, in with the Cretans, who are the Minoan civilization.
Yeah.
Also the Amorites of Babylon, I think, had strong connections. And I'm talking about mercantile connections, business, trade, you know,
Sure.
art, possibly ideology, possibly belief, you know what I mean? And then also they had connections with a very, very important group that, again, we'll introduce to people if they've never heard of it, you know, and maybe we can add some links, you know, to these groups. That was the Scythians or the Scythians.
Yeah. Very interesting group.
Yeah, very important group in history. The Scythians are basically Celts. So everyone's heard of the Celts. Well, a very important European group of the Celts was known as the Scythians, and these are the famous horsemen, the bowmen, you know, ferocious warriors, highly civilized, cultured, etc. Well, so when Akhenaten, to tie all this together, when Akhenaten and his gang are thrown out, they take refuge amongst their colleagues, these friends of theirs, the Cretans, the Greeks even. Do you know that? That in Athens, in fact, the word Athens comes from the word Aton,
Very similar.
or Atonism. Yeah.
That's right.
Because one of the major pharaohs, who was also chucked out of Egypt, ended up there and converted a lot of the elite of Athens to his cause. So we're talking about the movement and development of Atonism. The most amazing thing that is contributed by people like Ahmed Osman, Mustafa Gadala, and especially Ralph Ellis has been to show that these same Atonists I am talking about are no less the Israelites of the Bible.
Yeah.
So when you want to tie in the biblical connection here, for people who want to unravel that tissue of lies and mystery, understand that when you're talking about Jews and Judeans and all of this stuff about Israelites, start getting your head around this idea that is now 100% proven. We're not talking about any shadowy, alternative history here. We're talking about the facts, which is corroborated by some of the senior Jewish scholars.
Okay.
It was corroborated by Sigmund Freud. It was corroborated by Immanuel Velikovsky. Okay, we're talking about, and many more besides, that these same Hyksos, Atonistic exiles were in fact the Israelites. Not that the Jews of today, and not that the Pope, and not that the people in authority today ever want you to know that.
Yeah.
But we are now living in the age of awakening, as you said in the preview, right, of this show.
Yeah.
We are now living in the age of awakening, in which, this wonderful atonistic sunlight that they love. Hey, how do you feel, buddy, if we turn it on you? Right? You've been blinding the world with, for all these centuries, throwing light at us, throwing sun at us, symbols in the heraldry, symbols in the advertisements, right? Symbols in the corporate logos, symbols in the architecture. Well, wait a minute. Why don't we respond in kind and become a little, sort of like a little Illuminati of our own, and turn this big, halogen light on them? See how they like it. See how the Pope likes it. See how the Cardinals like it. See how the Jesuits like it. See how the Zionists like it. See how the royalty like it when their own symbols are now turned on them by us. What dirt we might find out. And what we're discovering is that these Israelites, and when you get into the history of the words like I do in the book, you start to find an amazing story. But these Atonists then being thrown out of Egypt didn't like to lose their homelands. I mean, this is the empire of the world.
Yeah.
You can't think of a more prosperous. Egypt, one of Akhenaten's forefathers, Tutmosis III, and then his own father, Amenhotep III, were the wealthiest men in the world. They ran the biggest empire in the world. Fleets of Phoenician ships, carrying trees and cedar trees to build the greatest temples.
Right.
Hundreds and hundreds of princes and dukes and foreign princesses, coming in tribute. The most cosmopolitan empires of the time, you can't even imagine. Just go to the British Museum and take a look at the statues there, or any museum that shows antiquities from Egypt, and you'll be stunned at the size of them and and the beauty and all of this. So, being chucked out of that, it's like that James Bond movie. The world is not enough. Where did they get that idea? Because that's what was on Akhenaten's mind. That even the rest of the world now will not match what we've lost. So this is where the New World Order concept comes from. But in an Irish context, you see, the Scythians weren't just a bunch of guys that only had loose ties to Egypt and hung around the Russian steppes. These people had a city south of Galilee.
All right.
Yeah, called Scythopolis.
Okay.
It's still there today. In fact, one of the first Christian bishops was set up in Scythopolis.
Okay.
The Scythians literally ran trade routes all the way down into Judea and Galilee and into
interesting.
Egypt. They were very well to do, and they had deep connections. We were probably part of the mystery school tradition over there. In fact, these Scythians, being Celts or Gaels, in the ancient chronicles of Ireland, going back to the 1600s, the histories that were written down, claim that the Gaels, these Scythians, actually contributed to educating the Egyptians.
Okay.
My work claims that the Egyptians had been educated thousands of years before that by the original Druids of Ireland.
Sure.
People find that preposterous. Well, no, it's not preposterous, because in historical times, or just, at the time of the Atonists, the Scythians are on record as being the teachers of the Egyptians, highly educated Celts.
So they are the connecting.
They're one of the connections
people
people need to know about. Ultimately, I'm talking about a worldwide, global collegiate empire which existed thousands of years before that.
Yeah.
But we can still trace it to the Gael. It lasts up until the Gaelic times. The Gaels being the people who came to Ireland from Europe, as the official history goes. So these Scythians are highly educated, are in with the pharaohs. They're being given tracts of land, you see, and dominion. They actually help the pharaoh in certain wars that they were having. The kings of the Scythians are given tracts of land, and one of the kings of the Scythians, called Miel, actually marries Akhenaten's daughter, Scota, from which Scotland gets its name.
Okay. Take that again for us.
Right, so here what we're talking about is when the Scythians are resident and being privileged visitors in Egypt, the records basically show you that one of their kings, Miel, who was very loved by the pharaoh, married the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, whose real name is Meritaten, right? They had 6 daughters, you see, and about 4 of them died of a plague. And Meritaten, like Nefertiti, vanish from the face of the earth.
Okay.
They don't die, but they just vanish.
Right.
And suddenly they're there, and the next minute they're not there. But again, in Irish Celtic mythology, it's all known. It's all known where Meritaten went. I can take you to her grave. It's right there in Ireland. You know, we go into this in the book. So, and her nickname was Scota, from which Ireland was named first. And then because Irish people moved to Scotland, Scotland got its name from the Irish settler Scota.
Oh, okay.
Or Scotia.
Yeah.
Right? Scotia's, in Scotland, they don't call her husband Miel, they call him Gadelis.
Okay.
Or Gadalas, like Gael, like the Gaelis, right? Gathalas or something like that. You know, it's like the Gael. But of course, in Ireland, in his own lands, in Spain, he was called Miel. So these Atnas basically start moving about within 600 years BC or 1,000 years BC. They start moving out of Egypt. And why it's so important is this last wave of invasion is because I track these Scythians, these Gaels, to the Atnists. I believe they were one and the same. And this is where my work differs from everyone else that writes on this subject. This connection has not been made.
Right.
It's in the ancient records that the Scythians were connected to living in Egypt during the time of Moses. We have quotes that even say that. Yeah, we have a quote here from James Parsons. He wrote a book called The Remains of Japhet, being historical inquiries into the affinity and origins of the European languages. This is a book written in 1767. So the 18th century writer, James Parsons, says that the Scythians carried on their learning and philosophy long before there were any Greek schools.
Okay.
Right? So the earliest writers knew this. We have from Geoffrey Keating, who wrote one of the first histories of Ireland back in 1809. His book was translated, although I think he wrote in the 1600s. His book was finally translated in 1809. He writes that Hector Boetius, in his History of Scotland, says that the Gaedalians, or the Gaels, were in Egypt when Moses was working wonders in that country for the delivery of the Israelites. And the Book of Irish Invasions agrees with that computation.
There we go.
Right.
Yeah.
He is clarifying for us that the Scythians and the Gaels were in Egypt, but when in Egypt? You know, I've claimed that the Irish were in Egypt from the earliest times, from the way before this. He is confirming that even in the days of Akhenaten, in the days of Moses, at the time when almost biblical history is beginning, we have the presence of Scythians, we have the presence of Gaels. You see?
Interesting.
There's a connection right there. And it's a very important one because these boys accompanied Akhenaten's crowd when they left Egypt and started, immigrating towards the west.
Yeah.
In these migrations that brought what I call Atanism, and what British Israelites refer to as Israelitism or Judaism or Christianity to Ireland, to Britain. People, I think, my work is there to try and assist people to understand that once you realize that when you're saying words like Judaism, Israelitism, Christianity, if you just make it simple and say Atanism from Egypt, lots of things in history are going to start making sense.
Yeah, it connects a whole lot more, I guess.
Yes,
in
it
that
does.
sense.
I have a quote from a guy who wrote a book, J. Hutchinson Cockburn. He wrote a book called Church Life in the time of St. Blaine. So he was writing on Scottish history, you see. He says that the Celtic Church in Ireland and in Scotland owed its origin not to Rome, but to Egypt. There is no doubt that the Celtic Church owed its ritual, its architecture, its worship, and its law to Syria, Egypt, and Palestine, and that its allegiance to Rome was slight. Now, this is incredibly loaded. Very, very important. Of course, what he doesn't tell you, because he doesn't know, that yes, it's true that the Celtic Church, that means the Christian Church, the early Christian Chaldean, Milesian, you see, churches in the earliest days of Christianity, he says are influenced obviously by Egypt.
Yeah.
What he doesn't know is that Egypt was influenced by Ireland in prehistoric days.
Via the Scythians or Scythians?
No, long before that.
Long before
through
that,
the,
okay.
Through the original Druids.
Okay.
Before this later conquest we're talking about happened.
Mm.
You see, they are all dating these Egyptian, elements, buying into the west to east movement.
Yeah,
but
exactly,
this east to west movement did happen. He's right. Of course it did. But it happened in much later days.
Afterwards.
Centuries afterwards. So they're only talking about the birth of Christianity. So when you're studying the history books, this is where you can be fooled. If you're studying most history books, they're going to be talking about historical days, the early days of Christianity's birth, and the people who birthed Christianity. And they're going to tell you that those elements, those symbols, those ideologies and tenets and theosophies and theocracies and even the characters are migrating, emigrating, being transplanted from eastern countries like Palestine, you see, in Egypt. They're willing to accept this. And then moving in and colouring the complexion of British Christianity. It's actually the reverse. When you go further back in time, that all the elements that returned to Ireland, that's what they did. They returned.
Yeah.
Remember in a previous show we were saying that all the ancient inhabitants of Ireland had to forcibly leave because of the earth catastrophes during the so-called age of catastrophe.
Yeah.
The Scythians, who are known to have occupied, you see, Turkey, right, and the steppes of Russia, literally Scythia, their own country, right, which is closer to Russia, Eastern Europe and Northern Europe. These Scythians, if you trace it all the way back, like I've done, are Irish.
Yeah.
They're part of the group I'm talking about. The Gaels are part of the group I'm talking about. The Celts are part of the groups I'm talking about. People who in the earliest days already occupied England and Ireland, migrated across the land bridges at early times, settled in these European, zones, influenced Egypt, influenced Crete, influenced the Greeks, influenced the Romans, the early Romans, influenced the Etruscans, the Mycenaeans, and even got as far as the Indus Valley. Forced to do so because of the upheavals, you see, that struck the Northwest. So if, like we said in the previous program, if these characters then, for one reason or another, in ages later, start migrating back home, or let's say to the land of their ancestors, to the seat of learning, it's a return. That's the word that needs to be in neon lights. So when the Scythians are accompanying, when Miel, you see, and his forefathers and the Atnists are moving into England, we have to understand they are only coming back to the homeland. That's in fact why they were seeking out the far western lands of England. And for instance, why would the Atnists want to go to those remote places?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have the idea of resources, of course, but we'll come to that later.
That's right. So we said earlier on, they make a beeline for the lands that they knew already.
Yeah.
That they all knew that was loaded with wealth. Not only was the seat of great learning, but was also the place where the mineral wealth existed.
Yeah.
Because now they were going to enrich themselves. But there's one key point that we've omitted, and that is this. As we said, the Atenists were an aberration of sun worship. They were in complete and utter rivalry to the Ammonists of Egypt. Now this opens up a very important point. From the earliest days, and I mean from 10 to 13,000 years BC, I believe the megalithic Irish, the original Druids, like these characters that were dug up, as I said, these blonde, tall Westerners, the disciples of Horus, they had been friendly. These were the Druids of Ireland and Scandinavia, had been on very, very close related terms to the Ammonists we spoke of.
Yeah.
Now, their history of their liaisons and their collaboration, you see, I believe, is going to be another page of history that's going to soon come to light.
Right.
And I hope my book kickstarts this again.
Interesting.
But don't you see the connection? Don't you see the logical follow-through? If the Atenists are rivals of the Ammonists in their own country of Egypt, they certainly can't be friendly with the Druids of Ireland.
Yeah, that's right.
By being enemies of Ammonists, it goes without saying that they were enemies of the Druids. Well, the myths confirm this because as soon as Miel and his Atenists get to Ireland, they declare war on the Druids.
Right away.
Instantly, right away. The very first thing happens.
That's interesting.
The very first thing. In fact, they're not only declare war, they're very rude. The Tuatha Dé Danann sent 3 of their goddesses, their queens. These are the queens of the 3 kings. The Druids did everything in Trinity, you see.
Okay.
They believed in Trinity more than anything else. So they even had 3 kings sit on the throne. At the time of the Tuatha Dé Danann, at this period, the kings were situated in Derry, which is in the north, not Tara. I mean, they had kings at Tara. The Iberians had kings at Tara. But the Danann at this particular juncture had their kings, I think, were situated in Derry, which is a corruption of the word Dwar, or Druid.
Ah, okay.
Derry, D-E-R-Y, was originally D-A-R-Y, or D-A-R-I, Dari.
I see.
We get the word door, D-A-U-R, Daur, right, from Druid.
Yeah, interesting.
You only have to go and look at the stones at Stonehenge. What do they look like? Those ones with the lintels on the top.
Yeah, it's a sun door, a sun gate.
Exactly. So and you find them all over the world.
Yeah.
You find that exact same shape in Bolivia and in Americas. You find this strange shape of the 2 stones with one on top, looking like a portal or a doorway. Well, I mean, they were built by the Druids, and one of the meanings of the word Druid means doorway. But rather than getting off into the tangents, we realize here that the 3 kings sat there. They sent 3 queens to meet the Milesians as they landed. And the Milesian kings, some of them were extremely rude to these goddesses.
Right. Like,
we're going to take your land, what the hell, get out of our way kind of thing. And so they were had antithesis. They were adversary. They were not favoring the matriarchy. Which brings us to the whole point of Atonism being a very masculine. It was the precursor of Christianity. Better believe it. Their own words in the ancient myths show this, that their antipathy towards the goddesses, these queens, their antipathy towards the Tuatha Dé Danann, their antipathy towards the land, their belligerent conquest, you see, with war. They could have cohabitated, but they didn't. They took over. Shows you that this was a patriarchal group, fitting very closely with the Hyksos, you see, and the Atonists of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's classically proven. Once you see the dots are connected, this makes sense.
So again, they are returning to Ireland to both absorb the knowledge, but also kind of exterminate that people to get the idea that they are the keepers of the knowledge. They are the ones who came up with this idea, not the Druids of Ireland, right?
That's right. And their antipathy would have been based on the fact that the Druids would have been cousins of the Ammonists.
Yeah.
Well, they're just getting away from those guys. They hate those guys. Now you're coming to another land, and the land is there for your taking, except for one problem. The Druids aren't your buddies.
Yeah.
They think you're a bunch of Luciferians who worship the dark side of the sun. You're not a pantheistic group, you see, who has a clue.
Yeah.
They're looking at you as you're deranged, and they know you're coming, and they know you're powerful. So, and of course, we're talking about myths that have been written down already pretty distorted because they were written down by monks. But yet, even in that, you can still see the real story unfolds. The Scythians who came with the Atonists already had their ancestors have been living in Ireland, I believe. This is not accepted by most scholars, but I believe it 100%. That all the Gaels, Celts, and Scythians originally lived in Ireland and had been displaced by the Age of Catastrophe. Then the land bridges sunk, and so these guys hung out more in Europe. But the special thing about the Scythians is that they are a glue, they're a connector between the time of the Atonists of Egypt and the decline of the Druids. So let nobody be under any delusion that this act of conquest was nothing benign whatsoever. It wasn't a seamless, charming, we're all welcome with open arms. Absolutely the opposite. But of course, these characters have written the history, so of course they're going to let you know that. They're the winners, remember?
Yeah.
How can the dead get up and say, excuse me, we have a problem with that story? They've been slaughtered, they're all dead. There's nobody there to tell you the truth.
Cool. Were the Atonists installed in Ireland when the Christian era began? The first very monotheistic sites in Ireland.
Well, this is the central question that is so crucial. Not when it began. As I said, they had arrived with the Scythians. Some people say 600 years BC. Others say about 1000 BC. Akhenaten's reign was about 1400 BC. So this movement wasn't overnight. The Atonists, who came to the West, did so over a period of several hundred years.
Yeah.
This is, again, and the dates, are pretty difficult to work out because everybody's got a different date. But somewhere between the fall of Akhenaten's empire, his reign, and then his daughter's life, you see, in King Miel, at this point, somewhere within that 400-year period, these fellows move back to Scythia, then they go to France, Spain. They have a big settlement in Spain. In fact, most scholars track them back to Spain.
Okay.
Spain features very largely in the story. because it's from Spain that as the story goes, one of the kings, Emil or whoever, spotted Ireland, you see, from a tower.
Mm-hmm.
These stories are pretty fake, but the idea is that it's from Spain that the Milesians start setting their eyes on Ireland.
Okay.
But it wasn't some guy just happened to spy it from a tower. These are people who had knowledge about that England and Ireland exist centuries before. They were making a beeline for that area because their forefathers had come from there. Exactly. You see, this is the contradiction that other scholars get into. In one breath, they're going to admit to you that the Scythians had connections to the Egyptians during the time of Moses. Well, how can you say that? If you're a true scholar, then you know that the Scythians had deep connections to Ireland.
Yeah.
So how can you then say that later princes and kings of the Scythians had no idea that Ireland existed? You see, so they get into these convoluted,
Sure, there's so many gaps in this.
Lots of gaps,
yeah.
and this, what we're trying to do is close these gaps. But you're absolutely right. Christianity rose, of course, after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
Jesus, his so-called his so-called time of preaching was 3 years.
Yeah.
We're talking about that something could rise in just a 3-year period. I mean, nonsense, right? But the official idea is that after the crucifixion, what we know as Christianity is called the apostolic tradition. The apostles go out, you see, to all the countries of the world and what have you, and to Rome and all of this. Yes, when Christianity arose after the crucifixion, Ireland was being held by these Milesians. Now we're talking about the historical cycle of Ireland, you see.
Okay.
And it's very important to realize what was going on in Ireland and how these Atenists were not only holding Ireland when Christianity began. We have to go much further than that. We have to understand that these Atenists were actually the founders of Christianity, and that Christianity's center is not, in fact, Rome, as we've been taught. Again, you want to understand history better, let's get the mind around that idea. That once you start to understand that Rome is only the epicenter, it is not the center, it's the administrative center, but it's not the ideological center at all.
Sure.
That happened to be Britain. So in one area with the British Israelites, I agree. They go to great lengths to show you that Christianity, you see, had visited Britain, either through Jesus himself going there, Mary Magdalene, we know about that now through the bloodline story, right?
Sure.
Of Jesus and Mary maybe coming there. Tony Bushby talks about it. The British Israelites have been going on about it for years before, Bajent and Lay came along with their Holy Blood and Holy Grail, and years before Tony Bushby and Lawrence Gardner or any of these people that we know today, long time before that, from the beginning of the 19th century and even from the 18th century, we've had the, Frederick Habermans and the British Israelites, you see, and E. Raymond Captain, so many authors, the Taylor brothers, going mad trying to tell you that England is the recipient, and many British Israelites in England who've written on this subject. There's whole groups of these people who absolutely worship Glastonbury Tor, and the sacred sites of Scotland, you see, believing that Jesus walked there.
Sure.
It's a huge tradition. Most Christians are probably not aware of it, but it's an enormous tradition. And it's not just a New Age tradition. This is not just something that's come up with a New Age movement.
So in a way, I guess also what we're getting at here is that there is actually a bit of truth in this if we actually go back to the real root of Jesus.
That's right. It's not just a simple matter of England and Ireland, accepting Christianity from the East. The birthers of Christianity are ensconced in those countries. There's a quote here from James Bonwick, who's a writer. He says that Iona, this is a very important Christian center in Scotland, on the island. He says that Iona had certainly a Druidic college till the community was expelled by St. Columba for his own community. And the Highlanders still recognize Iona as a Druidic isle, a Druid's isle.
Okay. Oh.
Right? So they move in, and they overtake. T.W. Rolleston, he says in his book Myths and Legends of the Celtic Race, it was written in 1911, he says that very soon after the conversion of Ireland to Christianity, we find the country covered with monasteries, whose complete organization seems to indicate that they were really Druidic colleges transformed en masse.
Yeah,
that's
what
it.
you mean.
There's your scholarly writing. Now, that means, the Druids just happen to go, good, we'll move out of the way while you guys come on over here.
The
British Israelites would love you to believe that. Books have been written that literally say this. Nothing could be further than the truth. He's saying that en masse, we talked about it on a previous show. This is colonialization. on a massive level by
Yeah.
people who've got tremendous power. Barry Dunford, in his book The Holy Land of Scotland, he's basically a British Israelite. He writes, many, if not all, of the Gothic cathedrals in northwestern Europe were apparently built on much earlier pre-Christian sites of worship, which may have been Druidic in nature.
All right. There
The
we
only
go.
one word there is may have been.
Yeah.
They were, period.
Hmm.
So he's a British Israelite, even he has to accept it. That their ideology, this is, we're talking about the conquest without the sword.
Sure.
And I even believe that these early Chaldean retreats, these monasteries, these churches, which are known to be in very remote locations, were put in remote places specifically, so that those monks would not be interrupted while they studied the old Druidic ways. Because these people who got there, the Atnas had been there at least 600 years. Well, if one corporation merges with another corporation, don't you have to then send in the bailiffs? And don't you have to send in the approvers and the surveyors to see what is of value? If your corporation goes bust, they don't just burn everything.
No, of course
They
not.
kill you off, right? They put you out in the street. You're taken to the bankruptcy court. But now they're rubbing their hands.
Sure.
They have whole divisions to go in and pilfer everything that now you have defaulted. Hell, they'll do that even in a storage bin that you leave for 2 weeks without paying for it. You might go back and there's nothing there. What do you think if this is the land of the ancestors? I can't not stress this enough. You have now appropriated the land of the ancestors. You've got their traditions, their lore, all of their knowledge. That does not get plagiarized, you see, overnight. It takes centuries. And it's these monks, these little wonderful, Disney World pictures that we have of these, charming monks sitting, drawing their illuminated manuscripts. We have no idea the criminality. I mean, get out Name of the Rose with Sean Connery, to give you a bit of an idea of just how ruthless and corrupt these people were. They weren't just sitting there doodling. They were there to abstract the knowledge of the ancients. Partly Egyptian knowledge, but much more Druidic knowledge. The great Atlantean stories, you see, the treasures of Ireland ideologically, spiritually.
Yeah.
They needed that time. So it's not it's not a coincidence that about 400 to 600 years after these Atnists arrive and take over the land of Ireland, that the phenomena we know as Judeo-Christianity starts to rise in the world. It is proven, if you do your homework, and we have the proof now, that it is from Britain and from these royal families that, were the first Atnist families there, these destroyers of the Druids. It is from these groups that the original Christianity arose. It's a British Christianity, not a Latin pagan Christianity. And this proof that Britain, Scotland, England and Wales was in fact the incubator of Christianity has been noted by many authors. Some of them are British Israelites, you see, and we'll get to their agenda later as to why they push this philosophy. But others are not. They're just normal historians. We have a guy called Polydore Virgil who wrote that Britain was, of all the kingdoms, was the first that received the gospel. Now he, of course, talking about traditional Christian times, just saying, oh, what a miracle that Britain seems to have, got it first. If only he knew they created it first, not got it first. But Sabellius says that Christianity was privately expressed elsewhere, but the first nation that proclaimed it as their religion and called itself Christian after the name of Christ was Britain. Again, pointing you in the right direction. But Barry Danford, in his book The Holy Land of Scotland, says that according to ancient Welsh texts, the Celtic princess Urgain, that's Eurgain, Urgain, founded a monastic college during the 1st century AD as a center for early Christian teachings. So it was actually a woman. She was actually closely connected, if not one of the Menzies clan. Clan of Menzies, and we'll talk about them later. Maybe the very important clan that people need to know about. I mean, everyone's heard of the Sinclairs, and whatnot, but this other group, Scottish people particularly, will raise an eyebrow about that because it's important to realize that the Menzies clan and the land that they owned. But it was one of their family that actually opened the very first monastery. Then a lady called Isabel Hill Elder, in her book The Celt, Druid and Chaldee, she says that the name by which the British Church was first known in these lands was the Chaldee Church. The natural result of Christianity having been introduced by this Kuldich. But the word Kuldich means refugees.
Oh, really?
Right. So that backs up my theory that they were foreigners to the place. In fact, the word Kuldi means stranger, foreigner, or refugee. Well, doesn't that fit what we're talking about? Homeless but wealthy human beings who are seeking, right, a foreign home.
Coming back again, yeah.
That's what the word Kuldi means. It might even come from the word, like we have ceiling, because the word Kul or Ciel or Chiel meant the sky, the dome of the heavens. We still have our word ceiling that means that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the Kul Day meaning the ceiling of God, Dea meaning God, God's heavens, God. There's so many different words that Kuldi could mean. But it's traditionally said to mean that it's foreigners or refugees. Then she says that the Kuldis established Christian churches, monasteries, and colleges, chiefly in remote places. Urgain, the daughter of Caradoc, and Caradoc is also called Caractacus, a very famous king. And this Caractacus had very, very close ties with the Roman Church and the Roman dignitaries in Rome. So this Urgain, the daughter of Caradoc, was the wife of Salog, prince of the old Sarum, founded a college of 12 Christian Druids. Now the Christian will tell you, oh, that's because there was 12 disciples, right? The people in the know would go, no, it's because she's borrowing from the Druidic, just like I'm telling you. Right? Moses even did that when he built the temple at Sinai. He built it with 12 stones in a circle.
That's right.
Yeah, in the Bible. It's right there in the Bible. When he goes and builds the temple of Gilgal, and there's the word Gal again, meaning gale, you see. He builds it with 12 stones in a circle. I mean, it's in the Bible. Anyways, this quote continues where she said that this Urgain found a college of 12 Christian Druids. She calls them Druids, which is ludicrous. That's what I'm telling you. The British Israelites want you to believe that these were Druids doing this, the early Christians. She builds this college of 12 Christian Druids, or Kuldis, at Caer Urgan, or Llanwit Major. These are places in Scotland. It's not going to mean anything to anyone else, but Scottish people should be aware of what we're talking about here. This college must therefore have been established in the 1st century. You don't do it overnight. You can't learn astronomy overnight, especially the esoteric form that was being taught in Druidism.
A lot of knowledge here to accumulate.
That's right. And you got an agenda. You're not sweating in these monasteries and these scriptoriums because you're dying to help mankind. You're dying to dominate mankind. You are looking for a new world order. You're looking for the world is not enough. You are the descendants of people who were thrown out of the greatest empire in the world. Now you want the whole world to be, as I show in the book, your plaything. You are now wanting to replace the thrones of Egypt with domination over the whole world.
So they got this idea that, okay, the only way to do this is through the knowledge, absorb all of this, and first and foremost go to the root of the knowledge.
Right. Go to the wellspring.
Yeah.
And as everyone knows today, if you didn't have those ugly cities that cover England and Ireland, imagine they're not there. Ireland and England is a garden paradise. It was called Albion, Avalon. Yeah. You couldn't imagine a more garden paradise. So these characters, when they get there, they're not only returning to the wellspring from which all of this knowledge comes, they're now going to have to sit quietly in remote areas, siphon through all the knowledge, plagiarize it as much as they can, create a new archive, give it a new shell, which we know as Judeo-Christianity, and use this to beat to death the rest of the world. Because they're not Ammonists. They're not going to allow you to worship as you want to worship. They're going to dominate you with their own solar theology. So he goes on to say, this is incredible, it's worth reading again. He says the Kuldi establishment had now established a firm footing in the nation. Not to save you, not to educate you, not to feed you, right? But to dominate you. Some of its members, he says, not only excelled in astronomy, poetry, and rhetoric, but also in philosophy, mathematics, and several other arts and sciences. And he admits, which exactly correlates, he says, with the learned Druid Magi. It is among the Scottish Kuldis that we are to look for that pure pattern of Christian life, such as was exemplified in the African, Greek, and Egyptian anchorites. Anchorites means renunciates. The early Christians who lived in the deserts, you see, who beat themselves with stones, and like Saint Jerome, anchorite is like a hermit.
Okay.
And there's an old tradition of the early Saint Jerome, for instance, was an anchorite.
Okay.
We can put up a link for people to explain what that was and how preposterous and weird the early Christianity was. Some of them, ties in with my work on sadism and self-sadism and all this stuff. Utterly crazy things that were going on. But he is saying we need to look to this British version of Chaldean Christianity. So it's not just a Michael Tsarion theory here. There's official, centuries ago, this was written up in the great histories of Scotland.
Very interesting.
Barry Dunford again in his Holy Land of Scotland says, it was in the far reaches of Glen Leon, north of Loch Leon, where in effect the first Christian church was apparently established. Again, it's not going to mean much to people listening, but if you're Scot, this will mean a lot.
All right.
And if you're thinking of taking a package holiday over there, Scotland, why not go up there to Glen Leon and look at all of this stuff. What I want to point out is look at the word Glen Leon. Glen is field, Leon is lion. What is the cardinal symbol of the Atenists? Anybody who's read my work and followed my stuff knows that the single most important symbol of the Atenists is the lion.
The lion, yeah.
And it's the all-pervasive state symbol that you see on the great flags of England now. Right?
Yeah.
We'll get to that later, what that means, right? But this royal standard that's on state buildings at Trafalgar Square, MGM.
Sure.
Again, the solar lion is the symbol of the Atenists.
Yeah.
One of the most earliest monasteries, their earliest castles, their earliest territories in Scotland, of all the names you could pick, right, just happens to be at the Field of the Lion, the place of the lion, Glen Leon. I don't think there's a coincidence.
No.
Dunford goes on to say that according to ancient Welsh manuscripts, it was in southern Wales that at a place called Llanwith Major that a Christian seat of learning was established during the 1st century AD, under the supervision of a certain person called Illid, right? So Illid. An Israelite. Dunford's calling him an Israelite, probably or possibly an Essene.
All right.
Yeah, who in fact was said to have been none other than Joseph of Arimathea. So he's saying that this Illid is Joseph of Arimathea, who is an Essene.
Okay.
Now he's endorsing the East to West movement here,
Sure,
right? Which is right. Yes, these people did move from the West, from the East to the West, and members of the royal family of Bran the Blessed, particularly his granddaughter, Princess Urgane, there's Urgane again, whose father, Caractacus, had spent several years in Rome at the same time as the Petrine Church. Right, that's Peter, St. Peter.
Okay.
Rome's named after St. Peter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, look what we're being told here. Isn't that a coincidence? That the supreme king of England and Scotland and Wales, he's born in Wales, Caractacus, and his clan, his daughter, Urgane, are hobnobbing in Rome at exactly the same time as St. Peter is preaching there. Whether or not you believe there ever was a St. Peter is a whole other question, but let's just go with what they're saying for now.
Sure.
He's saying at the same time as the Petrine Church was being established there. It should be remembered that Urgane and Claudia, that's her sister, were both granddaughters of the sister of King Metalanus at Fortingall. Fortingall is near this Loch Leon.
Okay.
It's one of the Menzies strongholds, okay?
All right.
But look at the word, Fort in Gal. Fort is obvious, it means what it means today, which is fort or castle.
Sure.
And Gal,
yeah.
the Gaels. The Gaels are the Milesians are the Atenists, or the Scythians, etc., or the proto-Christians. So this is what we have to tie up for people who've studied a bit of Irish history and Scottish history and know about this. Oh yes, we understand that it was a Chaldee church. Oh yes, like Alan Butler and Stephen Defoe have discovered, like we mentioned on a previous show, that these guys are identical to the Cistercian order.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's Irish monks, isn't it, who formed the Cistercian order that then had monasteries all over the world, the richest and most successful monasteries all over the world. They are the monkish wing of who? The Knights Templar.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
They're not just teachers of the Knights Templar, they are the Knights Templar. There's not even a division. These same families have two wings, and they love doing everything with a dialectic. Just like you've got Protestant and Catholicism today, or you've got Christianity and Mohammedanism or whatever, all created from the Vatican. I mean, the proof is right there. Well, it's no different in these early days when they're creating these divisions of the monkish side. That's job is to plagiarize the physical knowledge of the Druids, the spiritual knowledge of the Druids, I mean. And you have the military wing, you see, who will act should you need it, to spread the word, to dominate, to control, to destroy rivals. They got bloody rivals. They got plenty of rivals. You need an armed gang. You're going to tell us in history books they were wonderful keepers of the highways. They were wonderful protectors of the pilgrims. Fact is, no, they were butchers who mass murdered their way across Europe, killing all their rivals. Business as usual. Roman Empire's the same. Not that every Roman Caesar bought into this, of course.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We can talk about that a little bit.
Well,
there were some Caesars against this, I guess.
Yeah, particularly Diocletian. And his Caesar, Diocletian was an Augustus, which means an emperor, a very senior emperor. And his sidekick, whose name I can't quite remember now, Galetus or something, we'll put up a link. They were very much anti-Christian. They saw through all this lie, I believe. And in fact, Diocletian is a very, very famous and extremely enigmatic Caesar, or emperor, whatever you want to call him. I think he's always been a very important figure in Roman, history, and but is hated by Christians, of course. But I think that he and his colleagues wanted to go back to the old pantheistic, worship of many gods, and were absolutely upset and highly disturbed with this Christian thing going on, and so they went around, trying to suppress it.
So a little bit back again to the Ammonist ideology there.
I would say so, yeah. In my reading of it, absolutely. He's a guy who suddenly realized these guys are corrupt as hell. I'm trying to restore the empire, and we can't do it with these characters running around. So he's put the sword on them, you see. This is one of these uprisings. So let's not, when we're talking about Rome, we're not talking about all families being in cahoots.
Exactly. There's always some infighting going on and bickering and.
Yeah. I believe the Atonists had friends, but they were people in high positions of power. It wasn't all of Rome. It wasn't all the families. It was some specific families who had idealized Akhenaten, you see, who looked at him as the Sun King of the world, who looked at him as a legitimate Messiah. And these are the people who would have become...
But probably through some kind of secret societies of the day or some order.
Right.
That's how they disseminated the info and basically told everyone what the agenda was and where they were going with this, I guess.
Oh yeah, no doubt in my mind that they all were in collusion, but you have to win converts. Anyway, Dunford goes on to talk about that here we have Princess Urgane and her father Caractacus, who had spent several years in Rome at the time that the Petrine, that's the St. Peter's Church, was being established there. It would be remembered that Urgane and Claudia were both granddaughters of King Metillanus at Fortingal. All right, so we're not talking about down the line, a couple of centuries later, a couple of decades. We're talking about at the moment of the rise of Rome. The British, Atonistic, Milesian, Scythian, right? Families are right there on the spot.
Yeah.
Can we then say they play more than a role as just bystanders? So the Reverend John Williams, he says, in a book called The Ecclesiastical Antiquities of the Cymry, or the Cymry, that's the Welsh, or the Ancient British Church, a book he wrote in 1844, he says, the missionaries who introduced the Christian faith into Britain were Ilid, right, Sindav, Mawan, and a character called, I have to get this right, Arwistli Hen. These are, Welsh names.
Sure.
Arvistli Hen. Now this Arvistli was none other than the Aristobulus mentioned by the apostle in the epistle to the Romans.
Okay.
So here what we're talking about is another person who introduces Christianity. One of these families in England is actually mentioned in the Bible, in St. Paul's epistle to the Romans.
Okay.
Be that as it may, it is expressly stated that this Aristobulus, under a different name of course, Aristobulus was consecrated Bishop of Britain by St. Paul himself, and that he established churches and ordained presbyters and deacons in the islands. Okay? So there's another deep connection. Nothing remote about this at all. Then a writer called George F. Jowett, who wrote a book called The Drama of the Lost Disciples, he says something amazing. He says that it is interesting to note that the Bethany group who landed in Britain, and the Bethany group is the bloodline group of Jesus, Mary Magdalene. They call them the Bethany group, who may have survived the crucifixion and then are rumored, you see, in British Israelite philosophy particularly, to come to England. And many Christians have no problem accepting this. But he says, it is interesting to note that the Bethany group who landed in Britain was never referred to by the British priesthood as Christians.
Okay.
Nor even later, when that name was in common usage. They were called Chaldees.
Really?
As were the other disciples who later followed Joseph of Arimathea's mission to Britain. So what are they telling us here? That these guys formed Christianity, but they're not even referred to as Christians. They're referred to as the Chaldeans.
Chaldeans, yeah.
They're trying to, they were specified in their own time. So this early church is being formulated gradually. Now, here's the thing. You've just conquered the Western Isles, but you can't really run an empire from there because it's too far west. You'd lose control. So is it really not predictable that these characters would set up their epicenter, their administrative center, closer to the markets, so to speak? We're dealing with a corporation here.
Sure.
These Chaldees. They don't mind languishing in the Garden of Eden, right, over there in Ireland, and loving it, right? But you can't run an empire from there because you're too remote. So they have their henchmen, their lieutenants, run what we now know as Judeo-Christianity, rising in Rome. They're guests of St. Paul. St. Paul is guests of them. The tradition says that St. Paul came and visited. St. Peter, Simon the Zealots, right? Barnabas. The list goes on of the characters in the Bible who are known to have visited Britain.
Really? Yeah.
That's right. Did you know that in Rome there was a place called the Temple of the British?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Again, you can't understand world history until you get a grasp of this. That this Caractacus, and he's not the only one. Many kings, because remember under Roman rule, which just slightly preceded the Christian rule. When the Romans took over, yeah, they had a lot of resistance, but they also then finally did conquer, and they had a lot of puppet kings. Kings who said, okay, we'll rule in the Roman name. Well, if you sided with the Romans and you took their coin, as it were, or you started to rule in place of the Caesars, you were then a dignitary. You were, welcome in Rome. The British had their own temple.
Temple of the British Rome.
The Temple of the British in Rome. And this is a most important anecdote to understand of what went on there. And I believe it was a center of Atonism. I absolutely believe that this is where the entertainment went on. Do you know that St. Paul was entertained there?
No idea.
St. Paul was actually a very close relative of, and another guy who's mentioned in the Bible is a centurion of Rome called Rufus Pudens.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Rufus Pudens married Claudia of this Atenus families of England.
So
Urgain's sister.
And this doesn't, come out of the blue, marriages like this. This is to merge the different power centers.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, and the proof of that revolves around a very important king also in Scotland called King Metellanus. And Barry Dunford, he writes about this. He says that the ancient Scots chronicles, this is again an old manuscript, record that when King Metellanus died in AD 35, his successor was this nephew of his, Caractacus. You see, this very famous king. And that the sister of King Metellanus was the mother of Caractacus. Caractacus' daughter, Urgain, remember we talked about her? She was one of the people who opened the first monasteries. Whose grandmother was the sister of King Metellanus of Fortingal, is believed to have been a prime influence in introducing the Christian teachings into Britain. Her sister Claudia married a Roman centurion by the name of Rufus Pudens, who was purportedly banished to Scotland for his Christianity, where he preached earnestly the faith. St. Paul in Romans 16:13 refers to Rufus Pudens as chosen of the Lord. Moreover, according to the contemporary Roman historian Dio Cassius, Caractacus was also related to the British Queen Boadicea. So we got Caractacus, we got Boadicea, we got Metellanus. And Scots know these are very, very, very important figures. Welsh know these people as well. This is key figures in early Christian history and in British history. There's the St. Paul tie-in. The centurion of Rome is married to a senior princess of the British royal line. Right? They're all hanging up there at the palace of the British and elsewhere. Barry Dunford goes on to say that the Scots Chronicle also record that Metellanus, a wealthy king, was on very good terms with the government of Rome at that time. And then the St. Paul connection, he talks about it. He says that the coming of St. Paul to the British Isles, and as the historian Eusebius mentions, to the utmost corners of the West, is owned on all hands to have been after the 4th year of Emperor Nero, at which time he was set at liberty in Rome. So they're saying that first Paul was under guard, remember? They claim he was arrested.
Right.
And then he's suddenly set free, if we believe all this rubbish. And then he heads to England. Being to make his journey westward, it is not unlikely that he was influenced and engaged by that noble British lady Claudia Rufins. Oh, so Paul is so on good terms with her that she's influencing him to go spend time with her folks. Right, this is the official line. His convert, she's his convert, at whose house he was entertained, to proceed directly to Britain, to her countrymen and relations, to preach unto them the word of life. It is supposed that St. Paul came to Britain sometime before Suetonius Paulinus. He's a very important historian.
Mm-hmm.
All major researchers into Celtic mythology and Irish mythology use his book.
Okay.
He was like a Marco Polo type of character,
Okay.
who was one of the first people to come and write on the Druids. This guy is telling you, look, before he even set foot on Ireland, this gang was going on. The Atnas were already well in.
Sure.
The Rufins, people, and Claudia and all were doing their bit.
Mm.
There's an amazing quote from Henry Cairns Lawler in a book called Ulster, Its Archaeology and Antiquities. This book was written in 1928. He says, on some Irish megalithic monuments are to be found carvings of curious design and hieroglyphics, the key to the interpretation of which has not been discovered.
Mm-hmm.
The word hieroglyphic is derived from the two Greek words meaning sacred carving. Perhaps the most notable thing about these carvings is the resemblance of the designs to similar carvings and designs on stones, coins, pottery and seals found in the countries adjoining the eastern Mediterranean, especially Crete, Cyprus and Egypt. This goes so far to confirm the fact of the early Bronze Age traffic between these far-off countries and our own. In some instances, the symbols resemble those found in eastern Mediterranean or in Egyptian inscriptions whose meanings we know. For instance, in the right hand or upper Knockmany stone, this is in Ireland, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the top left-hand corner are several parallel wavy lines. This is a slight variation of the Egyptian hieroglyphic meaning the waves of the sea.
Mm.
A circle with radial lines spreading out occurs on several Irish stones. A circle with radial lines.
Mm.
Where do you see that? The symbol of the Aten, remember?
Mm.
Aten sun disk with the radiating lines.
Oh,
coming
okay.
up.
Now I see what you mean. Okay, yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
On
yeah,
an Irish
yeah.
stone, he says that a circle with radial lines spreading out occurs on several Irish stones and is found in the tomb of Akhenaten in Egypt.
There we go.
The
Yeah.
king Akhenaten introduced sun worship into Egypt, and the design, that's actually not true, but we understand what he means here. And the design is by some supposed to represent the sun or the chief god worshipped by the early Bronze Age visitors to Ireland.
Mm.
There it is. But these facts have never been brought to light, to be shown exactly how powerful it is to understand that not just it influences Christianity, that Atanism is responsible for the rise of Christianity, that its birthing place is not Rome but Ireland, but that the Cistercian monks, the Benedictines, you're talking about Chaldeanism here, and you're talking about Knights Templar and these secret societies, the lodges of initiation, the lodges of Scotland that are very, very powerful, the ceding of the land to all of these people. Is crucially important.
Michael, you mentioned the Sinclairs as an important family, but you also mentioned the Menzies during this era to be an equally important family.
Yeah, noble family, the Menzies, is crucial. There's many of these families. We know about the Sinclairs because they've come to light as being a Templar family. They own most of Scotland. And they're part of the Rosslyn, idea. The Rosslyn falls under the heading of what we're saying, a so-called Christian temple that seems to have so many pagan symbols on it.
Yeah.
What's that all about, right? Well, Barry Dunford has an interesting thing to say on them. He says that the 19th century writer, W.F.C. Wigston, he's a Masonic writer, refers to Rosslyn Chapel as a Masonic temple, the cradle of Scottish masonry, if not something deeper still. Let's read that again. He says that this is a Masonic temple, the cradle of Scotch masonry. That's heavy enough. And then he goes on to say, if not something deeper still.
What do you think he means by that?
Atanism. That these Masons are the keepers of this knowledge. These Templars, these Cistercians, of course they know what's deeper still. Deeper than the Orthodox understanding that the other Christians have. We are familiar now, aren't we, that it's coming to light, I hope everyone understands this, that Christianity has basically got two traditions. Since the work of the Gnostic Gospels, Elaine Pagels, since the time of Begent and Lay and the Bloodline, and now the Da Vinci Code, which is technically fiction, right? I mean, people must have grasped this fact now that even within Christianity there's what's known as an exoteric and an esoteric tradition.
Oh, yeah.
This is of their own making. They're putting this in front of you as if it's a rivalry. It's not, it's a game. It's a fake rivalry. They are desperate to cover up the destruction that they've done to the ancient Druids and to many other groups of people as well. So when these sort of paganistic images turn up, like the design of Rosslyn and so many other things, the robes that the Pope wears, the design of Rome. I mean, we've talked about this on so many other shows.
Sure.
When all of this ancient world, Almanistic and Atanistic and Irish, Celtic and all of this is Scythian and Chaldean imagery and Babylonian, Sumerian imagery is turning up in Christianity, they have to account for it.
Yeah.
But they don't account for it by telling you, well, don't you understand? That's from all the people we put in the grave. We stole all that. They can't admit that.
No.
Criminals cover their tracks. When you get them into court, they have an incredible story. They have the amazing ability to tell you the most amazing lies. Well, this lie is to say, well, no, I guess what we have to admit then is this. There's two traditions within Christianity. There's this Mary Magdalene, hidden bloodline, Grail, underground, technically Christian, and then there's Vatican and these guys. So then they want you to now side with one of the other sides.
Yeah.
And which is what they're really doing subtly to the whole of mankind now. That's why they put out these movies like the Da Vinci Code. That's why they're mulling over the idea as whether they're going to exonerate the Knights Templars. Tomorrow the Grand Master is going to be an Oprah Winfrey telling all. I mean, we're going to, in the end up, have something amazing happening to us in the next lot of years, where they're going to really continue exonerating these people. So instead of being seen as the arch criminals they are, they're now going to be put before us as the secret keepers. The keepers of the secret wisdom, just like that last shot in the Da Vinci Code, where they're all standing in Rosslyn in their tweed, the great enlightened ones who are just hard-pressed by the maniac Cyrus, you see?
Sure.
And these lunatic, bug-eyed monsters of the Vatican. What lies? This whole thing has been created to make you just, continue with like a pendulum between one or the other. You're either orthodox, an evangelist, and down with all of those weird...
As we mentioned before... it's almost like a reformation in a new era and a new, mystical background on this whole story is coming to light now.
That's right. And maybe, we'll do a show on why this is happening. It's a very important reason as to why this dialectic is being done, why so many Masonic writers from within the system are coming out to write books, so-called whistleblowing, why so many other critics are now telling you that there's nothing to fear from any of these, secret societies. They're just brothers of mankind and all of this. There's a reason why this is all happening. But anyway,
so I just want to squeeze in that question or comment there that so for those who are looking for a certain amount of traces from either previous civilizations or cultures or religions or ideologies actually can find some of that in what is being revealed now through the Templars. You think?
That's right. They're going to offer you a lot. They're going to offer you a lot of things that they're going to say comes from their tradition, but they're going to pretty much disguise the origins of it all. They're not anxious for you to know the true story.
Sure.
But yes, the Menzies is a very important group. Barry Dunford talks about them. He says it has also been recorded in the Scots Chronicles that during the 2nd century BC, certain philosophers were able to inform the then Caledonian royalty as to the whereabouts of rich deposits of minerals beneath the surface of the land.
Oh yeah, this is important, this part here, yeah.
Remember we said about the Boer War and the whole might of the British Army is sent down there to unsettle the Boers,
sure,
the Dutch, to get at the gold. See, it's like this. The Romans come and put people to the sword and basically destroy the purest blood of the Druids. For 400 years before that, we've had Atanistic people operating in a context of Ireland, doing the same thing. Converting Druidism, learning and weakening the roots of Druidism. Then we have the Romans, then we have the rising of Christianity. But the thing is this, that these famous families like the Sinclairs and the Menzies, these are royal families who are interested in mining. In fact, it's a very interesting study that people who want to check into any of this can go and look at it, that all the lands of these families that we're talking about just happen to be on the richest mining places where the ore of copper and metal is the most. In fact, King Metallanus gets his name from metal. Obviously. The king of metal.
Yeah, when you think about it.
They were international merchants in metal. It always comes down to big business, like Jordan Maxwell has said before.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you're living in Ireland and England now, right? These bishops, the early bishops of Rome that these people seated. Did you know that one of the families of the Menzies was like the first bishop in Lorraine in France?
Oh, yeah, tell us about that. That's
the Templar connection, we can get into that,
Wow.
So these are an international mercantile group. But the downside of that is if you're merchants only, you're a nobility, you don't have the right, the indigenous people, are not probably likely to let you go and build right on top of the ancient sites.
No, obviously not.
Which are Druidic. That's
Sure.
their religion. But you can do it if you invent a religion. So in the 400 years that they're sitting on Ireland, and have now finished absorbing all the Druidic knowledge, they still get the problem of all the Druidic traditions are right there in plain view.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't go and start building on it or digging mines there because that's unacceptable. It won't happen. But the only way you can do it is if you create another religion that you have enough Druidic elements to say, oh, but we've created a religion that's the follow-on from Druidism.
Mm-hmm.
It's the perfect logical move on.
Step,
right, and you've killed off everybody who would deny you this or criticize it.
Mm-hmm.
And you then transplant it to the East so that it appears that it's coming from the East. So the rising of Christianity is an ideological warfare. So that these families could get hold of the land and put the churches and buildings on it. Like we said earlier, they were en masse. These churches and these monasteries were put on the Druidic sites. That happened because they're religious sites. You had to create a religion to do it, and that was the plan that I believe took them a couple of hundred years to work out.
So we have three things here that is happening. First, they get in there and they manage to eradicate the Druids. Then they manage to get the resources out from the area, and they also manage to cover up the original, where the ideology came from day one, basically.
They do exactly what Akhenaten was trying to do in Egypt, which was destroy Ammonism. And if you read in my book the utter tyranny that he did, the desecration of the temples, you see, the forbidding the priests to practice, the rape of Egypt during the 18th dynasty. They picked up business as usual when they finally get over to Ireland.
Sure.
And also Ireland and England is a much smaller place to conquer.
Oh yeah.
It's simply easier. Plus, it's you feel better because you're in the land of the ancestors. You got a lot to win. You can really squeeze this tube. Yeah. But the thing is that again, the people live there. Ordinary indigenous people live there who've been there for thousands and thousands of years before you came. They're not going to like these, what they consider utterly sacred places.
Sure.
These are very sacred places, the places of the Druids. They're dedicated to the goddess. You don't go near them. How do you eradicate those places? You eradicate them by slowly inventing a new religion that in its early incarnation appears to be very similar. Remember in one of the quotes we said that they thought that the Essenes, Joseph of Arimathea was an Essene. The word Essene, Henrik, comes from the old Gaelic, pre-Gaelic, from the old god Essa.
Essa.
Which was the earliest sun god of the ancient Druids, the ancient Druids. Jesus is a later version of this. Maybe we can get to that in a minute, but this is what they were doing. They were plagiarizing the old traditions. So the Essenes wore white just like the Druids. In fact, I would say that the Druids, the Chaldees, and the Essenes are the closest linked. Really? If people want to look for similarities between all these weird cults, it's through the Druids, the Essenes, and the Chaldees that you find the thread.
Interesting. Okay.
But getting back to this thing about the Menzies, it's very interesting. There's a quote by Barry Dunford. He says that this is confirmed by D.P. Menzies in his clan history. Right. So this is one of the Menzies who wrote a book on his own clan in 1894. He says this genealogical family researcher claims that King Metellanus was descended from a guy called Meanus, from whence is derived the name of Clan Menzies, who was the son of Fergus, the first king of the Scots. Again, apologies to anyone who's not interested in this, but the Scots will, have a handle on some of this, hopefully.
Sure.
Fergus, the first king of the Scots, who, according to the ancient Scots chronicles, originally came from Ireland to Scotland in 330 BC. Now this D.P. Menzies remarks, Metellanus is said to have succeeded to the kingly office at about BC 13. So 13 BC, this character called Metellanus becomes king of Scotland. Tradition says that he has held his court at Fortingall. Remember that famous Fortingall?
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know if you know this, but the oldest tree in the world is at Fortingall.
Yeah, I think we talked about that.
It's a yew tree. Remember we talked about the importance of the yew trees and that they were even found in the Egypt as being worshipped, and that the yew tree, again, lots of Christian sites are right near yew trees.
Sure.
Well, again, this is the supplanting of the Druidic knowledge. And just as a case in point, that Fortingall is the oldest tree in Europe or the world.
Jeez.
Now, in the country of the Menzies, and their old castle there is called Garth Castle, is thought to have been one of his old strengths. He is also the Menzies who is pointed out as the one who induced his kinsman to study the arts of metal mining. Indeed, one of the forms of Gaelic of his name, Menzies, is mine. Like Klaus Mine, right?
Okay.
The name German, mine, mina.
Sure.
Which means metal or gold metal. Or mean. like MEIN, right?
Sure.
So here we're seeing something extremely important, because remember, skeptics and scientists can go and study this. Check out that these families were talking about where their land is, and it just happened to be out of the blue, right, where the gold is and where the mine, where the wealth is, and why Rome would be interested in this. Dunford says that according to ancient tradition, a relative of King Metellanus, who was known as Mansutius, founded a monastic seat of learning during the 1st century AD at a place called Dull, D-U-L-L, a few miles from Fortingall. So it's the Dull area, Fortingall area, that we're specifically talking about. Now he says that at Dull was a monastery of such importance and such proportions, it was awarded the unusual title of Abthanedum, right? Abthanedum. This is a title that's given. The monastery or abbey of Dull was of such great importance that tradition avers that it was the first seat of learning in Scotland. Exactly how this monastery and place of learning came to be situated in the Vale of Menzies is not known, but 2 traditions are connected with this initiation. The most recent refers to a Saint Adamnan, who lived and preached at Glen Leon in the latter half of the 7th century. But an even older legend, recorded by the Scottish chroniclers, attributes this inauguration of the College of Learning to this Mansutius in the 1st century AD. Mansutius was the son and near relation, as we said, of King Metellanus, and he went to Rome. Right? So this son of Metellanus goes to Rome. In Rome, he witnessed the preaching of the Apostle Peter. Right. Here's the cover story again, right? It's always about you bump into the apostle. Sure. What it means is you took a walk up to the palace of the British and hobnobbed with the Atonists. They're not going to tell you that, so they say, oh, he just happened to hear St. Peter, with his crow's ear,
Sure.
Whatever. You want to believe that? That's fine. So he goes to Rome, and he gets converted to the teachings of Christ, and he's ordained as a disciple. Again, the fake story to try and say, I had to go to the East to be converted to Christianity. We're not the founders of Christianity. We didn't invent it in Britain. No. We just happened to be on holiday one day, walking around in the streets of Rome, and got converted. And then old Peter says, why don't you go back to Scotland and open a monastery?
Sure. Yeah.
Good idea. I'll hasten off and do just that. And every Christian is going to now accept this.
Yeah.
No question of the power dynamics you see in the mercantile trading that's going on, right?
Sure.
It's all holy. It's all religious. So these crooks, and believe me, the people who are the cardinals and the propaganda due, P2, right, and the whole host of the Club of Rome, you think they're doing anything different to this day?
Nope.
Certainly the monastery of Dull, you see, owned large areas of rich land, which this so-called Saint Adamnan would not have had access to, but which could well have been the original heritage of Mansutius. So another point. Do you conceive of the amount of wealth we're talking about here?
No, I do not, frankly, no.
Right. Templar wealth, as I've got in my chapter on the Templars in the book, will let you know that when you hear these little anecdotes about, the Templars were the first bankers of Europe, etc., and they had a lot of money and treasures. How come? Yeah. And that when they were purged in France, they ended up in Scotland. These are the same people who are in control today, because these were the people who built the cities of the world. They built not only the monasteries, they not only built Rome, they not only built Edinburgh, we're talking about the builders of our Christian civilization.
The universities,
the banks, the historical institutes, the lot. These are the characters we're talking about.
And I guess you also have a lot of money, a lot of gold, silver, and so forth, but also for other kind of resources we can start to industrialize and, technology, high technology, as a consequence of this.
And if you go to these modern technological institutes, and I don't care how shiny and gorgeous they look in the cities, you will always find the royal insignias in the architecture. You'll always find some weird Masonic stuff or a bizarre sculpture that you, of course, as a student, won't have the faintest idea what that means. Start checking into it. Start finding out what these symbols in the cities mean, what they're related to. I found that quote by Dunford about the connection to France, just for people who think we're making this up, in a book. But Dunford says that in the book The Coming of the Saints, published in 1906, the author John W. Taylor says, Mansutius then becomes called Saint Mansu. He's now a saint. They canonize him overnight. We have enough bucks, enough money. So now Mansutius of the royal houses of Scotland suddenly becomes Saint Mansui. All right? An Irish or Caledonian Briton, Caledonian just simply means Scotland, for those who don't know. It's the old name for Scotland. He's an old Irish and Caledonian Briton, became the Bishop of Toul in Lorraine
Right. Okay.
in AD 89.
Hmm.
All right, so we're talking about the same Champagne, same Burgundian, Templar families
Sure.
coming out of France. That's why you see the fleur-de-lis, so many on Scottish flags.
Okay.
There's the whole Scottish tie-in,
Sure,
you know.
sure.
We go into this in the work, showing how all the kings are descended from these characters we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's how you become a king. Kings are rich. Kings are related to these dynastic families. Kings have said the right things theologically, right? They go on indoctrinating. He says that this Mansutius, he says, was a constant visitor to the palace of the British at Rome after Claudia had married Pudens.
Okay.
And I said Rufus Pudens, the centurion, is mentioned by St. Paul in the Bible, no less. He was a friend of Linus, the first bishop of Rome.
The first
The
bishop.
first bishop of Rome.
Okay.
We're not talking about years down the line, centuries, decades. The first bishop of Rome is a pal with all of these guys.
There we go.
Right. This is the connection that, you know, and when you see the Egyptian imagery, not only of Rome itself, when you take into the fact that Rome is aligned to the ancient Celtic, the ancient Irish sites of Knowth and Newgrange, to the sun doors no less, right? You understand that this is the Egyptian connection, the Atenists, because there's only one people who have this connection between Ireland and Egypt and Rome. Now he says that this happened. Now he says after the death of Saint Clemens, Mansutius became the first official bishop of the British Church at Rome. What a character. He's bishop down in Toul in Lorraine. He's pals with the first bishop of Rome. And bishop of Rome means Pope of Rome, by the way, just in case people don't understand what that means.
Okay.
The bishop of Rome is the Pope,
Okay.
right? And he's made, after the death of the first saint, you know, like St. Patrick's era, because this is all happening around this time of St. Patrick also. Let's not forget that.
Okay.
This is all happening in the first wave of saints, so-called. But after the death of St. Clemens, who was the first, who was appointed for England, it's this Mansutius of the House of Menzies who becomes the Bishop of Rome, the Bishop of the British Church of Rome.
Wow. Yeah. How about that?
Elites.
There's a clear connection again between all of these, the areas, the families, and the timeline even when all of this starts springing up. You know.
The symbolism.
Sure.
The Egyptian symbolism. We wish we had time more to go in it. We mentioned a few there that the stones of Ireland are covered in Atonistic symbolism.
Yep.
It's proving that they got there. The proof has now come to light. You know, that I'm collating all of this work because people don't have, 3 centuries to research all this.
That's right, exactly.
So I've we have to, I very sincerely believe that scholars of this age, especially in alternative history, have a job as collators to synthesize, so that you can synthesize lots of information for people to get it in very quick time.
Absolutely.
You can get it in matters of days.
Mm.
You read a chapter, it'll only take a couple of days. You're going to get centuries of understanding.
Mm.
This is crucially important. It's not just to keep on beating to death one area, you see.
Sure.
We need to look at things synthetically now. Who were these Romans? Maybe we've been told a pack of lies. Who were these, Chaldeans? Who the hell are these Cistercians that had these salt lines and ley lines all marked out?
Sure.
Who had the audacity to build their temples over ancient sites? In fact, you see, when you really take it down into the deepest level, what we have to understand is, as we said, you can't molest the sacred sites unless you turn it not from a business, but it has to be a religion.
Mm-hmm.
This goes to the full extent of creating. You also need to account for the reason why you've plagiarized the ancient canon of the Druids.
Yeah.
Within the canon of the Druids was a famous god called Issa.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
Issa.
You mentioned that.
Or Iassa, right? In fact, in Aramaic, the word for Jesus is Issa. In India, they still call Jesus Issa.
Really?
Yeah, Iassa. And even in the Quran, he's known as this. But Iassa is a god known thousands of years before Christianity was ever born. Iassa was known thousands of years before Atonism was ever born. Okay? This is one of the most important gods of the ancient Druids. What better than to create your Christianity, to fabricate this God? And as Jordan Maxwell has also shown, there is no historicity to Jesus. People should understand this now, because it is absolutely understood that all the events that happen around Jesus are astrotheological in nature. You have this component in the Bible that St. Paul was basically plagiarizing all the old astrostellar symbolism. How can that be a biography? Nazareth has never been discovered. They've even found that it doesn't exist.
Really?
It was never a place. None of the events or the circumstances or the topography of the Far East matches. So when people like Commons Beaumont come along to tell you that all the things in the Bible actually are things and events that took place in Britain, now we can understand what he's talking about. It was transplanted over there. Because, again, you have to have the creation of a Jesus, a Christ, be far away from Druidic lands.
Yeah. Look over there. Not,
Look over there, not
on
here.
this land, yeah.
That's right. And, of course, they don't mind. Like I said, remember there's two strains of Christianity, the esoteric,
Sure.
under which comes the Templars, the Cathars, the
Essenes.
Bogomils, the Essenes, yes, and then the Orthodox. The steering committee doesn't care if Orthodox Christians forever to the day they die believe that Jesus came out of Palestine. What's said in the Bible. If you want to believe that, they're happy. They know that the esoteric groups, these Templar elites, you see, these nobles, they know the truth. But it's okay if you don't know it. They don't mind.
Yeah.
If you live in ignorance of it all.
Sure.
So he says here that one great quote from Reverend C.C. Dobson. He says that the more Druidism is studied, the more apparent it is its relationship to the revealed religion of Mosaic law. Here's a guy who's a reverend who's touching upon it. He's studied both sides, and he's starting to wait. He goes, look, this whole Judaic Mosaic thing, man, it looks so much like Druidism. These Essenes, it looks like a bunch of Druids. That's right, because the Druidic teachings had been in Egypt thousands of years before atomism was even heard of. All of it was a warped version of Druidism.
Sure.
Dudley Wright, in a book called Druidism, The Ancient Faith of Britain, which is absolutely unavailable. A lot of the books we're quoting from, by the way, are very hard to find, especially this one. Right? Dudley Wright, he says, the fact must not be overlooked when speaking of the supplanting of Druidism by Christianity. That the Druids held many tenets inculcated in Christianity and the practice and customs of the Christians. The doctrine of the immortality of the soul, the belief in miracles, the doctrine of reincarnation, all of this in those days, articles of the Christian faith, right? As we know, in early days of Christianity, right? They believed in reincarnation.
The more Gnostic.
Yeah, in the early days.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it was official. He says all of this had already been imparted to the Britons by their own priests.
Sheesh.
I go further. I say there's not a thing in any of Judeo-Christianity that's not born out of Druidism, although it's warped. Don't believe the apologists. Don't believe the propagandists who say it's a seamless evolution of Druidism. The Druids would have been jumping with joy. No, they were put in the flames and were hacked to pieces because they wouldn't buy into this. They knew who you were. Quote from George Jowett again. He says, the astounding fact is that whereas the Sadducean Judeans were never familiar with the name of the Messiah, his name was known to the British long before the memorable event transpired on Golgotha Hill.
There we go.
Right? It was a name familiar on the lips of every Briton. The indisputable fact is that the Druids proclaimed the name first to the world. How the Druidic priesthood, now here's the classic line, how the Druidic priesthood knew the consecrated name so long beforehand is indeed a mystery in itself. The name Yesu was incorporated in the Druidic Trinity as Godhead. It's no mystery. There's that word again. Yeah. Mystery. It's a mystery. It's only a mystery if you're a Christian reading Christian books indoctrinated by Christianity.
They remote viewed it, you see.
That's right. Same thing is brought up by the incredible researcher that my book is dedicated to, Commons Beaumont, the Scottish researcher, English researcher who had studied all of Scottish history and world history. He said that as far back as 1640, the German traveller Kort, after a complete topographical examination of the present Jerusalem, decided that it failed to coincide in any way with the city described by Josephus and the Scriptures. Did you know that but Ralph Ellis is absolutely convinced that this so-called Josephus, the famous Jewish historian, was none other than St. Paul?
Really?
Yeah, so this quote will make more sense when you buy into the latest researches of people like this magnificent writer, Ralph Ellis, who is convinced that Josephus, the famous historian of the Jews, who's we turn to his writings about the Middle East, he's none other but the same propagandist St. Paul we're talking about, who's sitting there being schooled by the British.
Sure.
What to write.
That would turn things on the head, wouldn't it?
Exactly. So he says here, Beaumont goes on to say that it fails to coincide in any way with the city described by Josephus and the Scriptures. Claims that the tomb of patriarchs Abraham Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are buried under the mosque in Hebron, possess no shred of evidence. The rock-cut sepulchres in the valleys of Jehoshaphat and Hinnom are of Roman period and late Greek inscriptions, and there exists nothing in groups of ruins in Petra, in Sebaste, in Baalbek, Palmyra, or Damascus, or among the stone cities of Haran that are pre-Roman. Right? It's very new. Nothing in Jerusalem itself can ever be related to the Jews. Dobson goes on to say, the basic Druidic belief was in a trinity, Henrik, right? You only have to go to their monuments to see it.
Sure.
Right? The Godhead was called Dua, D-U-W, like where we get our word Deus. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Or a day, even. Du, from which we get the word Jupiter, Jew. See, the D was pronounced J in some countries, so Jeu, or Deu, right? So the Godhead was called Deu, or Du, the one without darkness who pervaded the universe. Then 3 golden rays of light were the emblem of Druidism. Right? That's Kabbalah, by the way. 3 rays of light is the 3 pillars of the Kabbalah going down from Godhead, which everyone thinks is Jewish. Total lie. Right? It's Egyptian Druidic is what it is. So 3 golden rays of light were the emblem of Druidism, representing the 3 aspects or persons of the Trinity emanating from that Godhead. And they were known as Bel, the creator god of the past, Taran, the controlling providence of the present, and Esu, or Yesu, the coming savior.
The Holy Trinity right there. Yeah.
But they describe Yesu very clearly as the coming savior in the future.
Okay.
He's always described that way. And he's a sacrificial god. He has his side pierced with a sharp instrument, and his blood flows into the earth. And he's always shown that his blood is sacrifice because the earth needs his blood to be reborn. This is what the Druids always showed. And Yesu, the rite of Yesu, during the time when his rites were being done, they'd always chop a tree, all its branches off, and make a tree that had a cross shape.
More like an X?
Like an X, or just like a T.
Okay.
Right? And on the T part, they'd write the word Jesus. H-E-S-U-S, or Iesa, right? And they'd often show that Iesa would be hung in the air like he's all nothing. Sometimes he was even shown in a cruciform with his hands outstretched, like the cross, but on nothing, just with the sun behind his head, giving his blood sacrifice. He was a sacrificial god. And he says that Druidism thus anticipated Christianity and pointed to the coming Savior under the very name which Christ was called. J.R.S. Mead, one of the greatest theosophists, he wrote a book called Did Jesus Live 100 BC? It's a crucial book to have. I think you can read it free online. He says, we know further from several sources that the Christians were originally called Galileans. Galileans, right? Sure. Gael, Scythian, Atnist, Irish, right? Galilean. It is said that Julian the Emperor desired to have them so called, and in his own writings he invariably refers to them under this designation. Justin Martyr knows of pre-Christian sect called Galileans. Pre-Christian, that's very important, because that's what we're talking about. Epictetus, another historian who died in 117 AD, calls the Christians Galileans. Mani, in the 3rd century, calls the general Christians Galileans. They weren't called Christians. Christianity was already in the world. It was already Essenes who predate Christians. A group called the Therapeutae, which we don't have time to cover. Therapeutes were pre-Christians. Now he's talking about Galileans from Galilee. People who've really done their homework with Christianity know that Jesus' mission was really in Galilee, not Judea. The 3 books of the Bible, the 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, always say that he was in Galilee. It's only John who starts talking about Judea.
Okay.
The fact is that it was all happening in Galilee. They were all Gentiles in Galilee, not Jews in Judea. There's another lie right there within the Gospels. So I believe this is all transplanted. These are all Atnists setting up shop in Palestine so that they can talk about Iesa without you being too close to home.
I see.
They're creating a religion.
Yeah.
And they're creating a religion there because King Metlanus is sitting on his ass on top of all that money thinking, how the hell are we going to territorialize this place?
Yeah, exactly. Keep this.
Yeah,
and
we're going to have armed peasants coming down with clubs going, get off these ancient sites.
Sure.
We may not like them, but, look, these are our sacred heritage. These are strategists. These are people who know how the game of colonization is played. Mead goes on to say that for a short time, the Christians also called themselves, and get this, Jessians. Jessa. Like Jesse.
Sure.
Jesseans. He says that now it is well known that the name Essene is one of the greatest puzzles of scholarship. Upwards of 20 derivations have been given by ancient and modern writers, and the riddle still remains unsolved. Well, it's just been solved.
Yeah.
The Essenes were not even aware of Jesus' existence, okay? They barely write about the guy.
Okay.
They are coming from... People have no idea where these guys came from. They can't link them to the Jews, although that's been done, but that breaks down, you see. Every new discovery that's made makes it more elusive. It isn't elusive when you understand that the Sadducees, the Israelites, the Jews, all these people that you're referring to as Judeans, these people that you're referring to as Christians, basically are, as we said at the beginning of the show, Atonists. It all has the root of the mother of Atonism. Because as Ralph Ellis has shown, these Israelites are the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. He's not the first to show it. Beaumont already knew it. Velikovsky speculated on it. Sigmund Freud knew about it. Do you know how many authors in the past went into this that never anybody read? It's taken till our modern times now for this fact to come out again. Once you realize these connections, you have no problem understanding that Atonism controlled a lot of them. Atonism was behind most of these groups. It was behind Mithraism. It was behind the Zoroastrianism. They're all hybrids. They're all worshipping the sun in one way or another.
Monotheistic.
Monotheistic. They're the monotheism. And that type of monotheism, especially that warped, patriarchal, masculinized, highly exclusive, you see, and very almost puritanical, tyrannical form of sun worship is the child of Atonism, which spread throughout the world. And Dunford goes on here to say something incredible. He says that there is certainly reason to suppose that the family of Jesus may have been related to the Celto-British royal family of the time. So he's saying, look, if there is a character, even if there was a man out there in Palestine, he's related to these British royal families. I believe there was a man. Ralph Ellis has taken it back to a guy called Jesus of Gamala. And Jesus of Gamala is actually related to the Roman houses.
All right.
He was a son of Cleopatra and one of the Roman pharaohs, Roman Caesars, I think Julius Caesar. Yeah, I'd have to look at my notes. But as far as I can remember, Ralph Ellis has taken, he is the closest person, and he's not a British Israelite, so he's not contaminated by all this, did he go to England bit, which is very spurious, right? Because, if you believe Christ went to Europe, from the information I'm giving you, you can equally discern that he left Britain to go to Palestine.
Yeah.
I mean, once you're into British Israelitism, it works both ways.
Sure.
Joseph of Arimathea brings a child, Christ, to the Holy Land, of England. Well, wait a minute. The half of the British Israelites believe now that no, he was born there and was transplanted over to Palestine. But if you leave the British Israelite ideology behind, then you follow these other authors who are trying to pinpoint who was the closest approximation to the man known as Jesus, not the Christ that Paul created, who's a god.
But the real man.
A man, a revolutionary, maybe a messianic character. Well, there's lots of them, and I have them all listed in the book. In Book 2 of Irish Origins, we list all the main, protagonists.
Interesting.
Out of Judaism, out of Gentilism, you see. Some of them incredible characters.
That are possibly
were based on Christ.
Jesus. Okay.
On the Jesus, sorry. And one of them was a most interesting character, is actually by the name of Apollonius of Tyana. But another fascinating character who's really interesting life story is Jesus of Gamala. Which was a region, you see, in Palestinian and Judean era. And Ralph Ellis is the expert on that. People need to pick up his books and look into this to find this out. So there may have been, just like they borrowed all the astrotheology, just like Paul, right, used the archive, the canon of astrology to create his 12 disciples and his whole little mythos of Jesus. So these Atonists may have also borrowed from a lot of other histories. But you see, as Beaumont and so many people have pointed out, there's a problem. By displacing their Christianity and their Jesus to the foreign eastern shores, they also made a mistake. They knew too little about those areas. By knowing too little about those areas, they left a lot of glitches. Because they know nothing about the Palestinians. The Palestinians are never mentioned or described in the Bible.
Really?
Yeah, the topography of the area is a total bogus. I mean, they can't dig up anything that ever, corresponds, because believe me, if they could, they would. You'd be hearing about it from morning to night. The fact that you don't hear about them finding anything is because there's nothing there to find, as these authors say. It's limited. And I have an entire part of the book 2 of the Irish Origins called Did Israel Exist? I want people to go and read that. Refer to the works of Professor Thompson. We'll put up links. Thomas L. Thompson. Incredible thesis showing that, it's a complete lie, just like Beaumont and all of these people knew, that this ancient history has been concocted. Most of Christian history has been concocted. And this was the mistake for, ideological and political reasons, they had to situate Christianity in Rome and further afield. Because Rome is nicely placed, is it not, between the Eastern world and Western. That double-headed eagle of control
That's right.
can operate from Rome.
Yeah.
Two empires, East and West. To keep a handle on your enemies, right? To be near ports of the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
What good is out there in northern Scotland
Sure.
going to do you? That's your garden retreat. You got to run the trade lines of Mesopotamia. I mean, if you don't do it, your rivals are going to start doing it.
Yeah.
Right? So you're into business. You're into felling trees and starting the whole shebang going, you see. And to do that, you need to be near the places where the spices are grown, where the minerals can be sold, all of that. They're very clever.
And this is a natural step in a global empire, that you have different centers for different purposes,
That's right. And although we don't have time to go into it, one of the other big loopholes that prove everything that I'm talking about is the similarity between what people think of as Hebrew and Gaelic. Another loophole, if we would take a whole other show to explore this,
Sure.
is the amazing connections between the Hebrew language, which is nothing but Phoenician, by the way. The Phoenicians tie into all of this. The word Phoenician actually means men who are red men. And one of the reasons why they were called red is because that's what a white man's skin turns when you're burning up in the Mediterranean.
And an Irishman, yeah.
An Irishman are Nordic men, right? Long blonde hair, huge blonde beards, piercing blue eyes, and burning red skin. You look like a god, right? When your ship's pulled up. And these characters turn up in the Middle East. They really look special. Plus, they also wore copper because they were copper miners. So their bracelets, jewelry, and necklaces were made of bright red copper, shining like the sun. They made a really incredible, appearance. They were expert in wood. They were high astrologers. They were navigators. They told all the stories. They were conquerors. They were the giants. The Phoenicians were the giants. They also are responsible for dyeing cloth in beautiful hues. They're responsible, mythology says, for building the Temple of Solomon. There's a whole tradition of the Phoenicians. So Old Hebrew, which is not what Jews speak today, by the way, Yiddish and modern Hebrew are what's called classical languages, just like Latin and Greek. They're not in any way related to what the Bible talks about as ancient Hebrew.
Okay.
Ancient Hebrew is more connected to Aramaic,
and
it's also connected to Phoenician. It is Phoenician. But the red men were from the West. The closest language, parent language to to Hebrew is Gaelic. Even Welsh, and you know something, even Cornish, the language of Cornwall, is indistinguishable in its syntax and its lettering to Hebrew, to the ancient Hebrew.
That's
another cover-up.
Yeah.
Proving these connections between the British Isles, the Gaelic, the kings, and the Eastern setup. But it's not that the Scythians brought that language. They also spoke it and were experts. The Scythians themselves had colleges all over the world in the later days. But my work is to show you that even before the Scythians, even before the Gaels, even before the Celts, even before Atanism, the Druids were there. They were already spreading these languages. Of course, languages changed a little bit depending on the region. The dialect changes or the syntax may change. But the essence of the languages are originally from Gaelic. What ancient Gaelic is, which is why Christianity declared war on the Gaelic language, as we said in previous shows.
Again, sir, I mean, there's so much in this book. You can,
So it's all there.
So
we're just
exactly, and so many things that we didn't have time to get to in this show. But that is why people need to get the book and read it for themselves. And they need to explore these areas. And again, this is, as we pointed out in this show, that this is stuff that is connected with things that are going on today. This is a history, and it's a timeline behind this.
Well, see, the main idea is to realize that this is not ancient history. This connects with what's happening in the world today, because the founders of these monarchies are still in existence in one way or another. It wouldn't mean a thing if it was just a matter of a benign, changeover in religion or whatever. The people that we're talking about who desecrated Ireland, who obliterated this ancient tradition, who destroyed the colleges of the elders, they took that knowledge and are using it today.
Yep.
These same Knights Templars, who are just a stone's throw ago, were behind the Bourbons, the Guise family, the Savoys, the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, all the people you think, people who don't think matter, the Habsburgs, the Hanoverians, the people behind Russell Trust, the people behind Skull and Bones, the people behind the secret societies, the Freemasons, the Templars, Propaganda Due. These are created by these same core families that we're talking about. Ancient crimes, modern times. Rome. And see, why it's very important is, you see, tomorrow they may be planning something to throw up in your face that you're not going to understand what it is unless you know how these people have operated from day one.
That's a possibility.
What happens if they concoct another Messiah tomorrow?
Yeah.
What happens if they exonerate all these secret societies and all mankind turns around and goes, okay, we accept that these were the forefathers of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
That they've actually been hidden, granted, but that's because they were being persecuted. And don't forget that after AD, after the crucifixion, I'm not denying that these groups then went on to have tremendous infighting.
Sure.
We're talking about Diocletian, the pagan, goes and massacres. And we have subsequent massacres within Christianity. Constantine murdering a lot of people, including his own wife. And then we have the Templars being suppressed, right? We have the Albigensian Crusade, in which the Pope declares war and murders, puts all these people in the flames. We have Montesigur, the destruction of the Cathars. But to me, that's all really to be taken with a pinch of salt. I don't really care if Frank Nitti, the enforcer, is now fighting Al Capone.
See what you mean.
If Tweedledum is bashing Tweedledee in this Punch and Judy show that's been set up so that your eyes are on the stage show that they have created. They're all ateists. They're all Christians. Now that they own the world and they've murdered everybody that was true and sacred and pure, now that they've butchered witches and massacred the women of the world and own all of these lands, don't you think that these pathological, insane megalomaniacs are going to eventually start turning on each other and go, no, that's mine, no, that's mine, that belongs to me, no, that's a bit of mine, and pulling and tearing at each other?
Yeah.
That's only to be expected.
Of course.
But I don't worry about it. I am thinking of the bigger crime that these people, are guilty of. When one pope is clubbing another pope and, all these wars, 100 years war, 30 years war, to me it's like, okay, whatever, they're already guilty of unimaginable crimes. Now they start turning on themselves.
Sure.
What of it?
Yeah.
They're all hyenas anyway. And you need to know that because you ain't going to make sense of any of these rivalries that history puts in front of you or that your history teachers put in front of you. You're never going to work it out. Because what is the consequence of not knowing what I've just said? You identify.
Yeah.
I'm for that esoteric group. Hey, I'm really into that. No, I'm an Orthodox Christian. We should have it this way. I'm a Protestant. No, I'm a Catholic. No, I favor the Templars. No, I don't. If you side with any of these groups, no, I'm for William the Conqueror. No, I'm a Saxon. No, I'm an Angle. I'm a Jute. We have to have it this way. I'm an Irish Catholic. No, I'm an Irish Protestant. I'm a black Jew from Africa. We're elite. No, I'm a Khazar Jew. No, I'm Ashkenaz. If you believe in all of these divisions and think that they're real and that they're legitimate, you side with these groups.
Sure, you're in the game.
You're playing the game.
Sure.
And you're allowing this horrible edifice to continue. And why are you doing it? Is because you think, look, if we can only get this gang out, our gang will be in and the world will be living in harmony. How much more atrocity do we have to have before we realize that if that gang leaves and this gang comes in, nothing changes. Nothing ever has changed.
Yeah.
That's my point. They're all the same gang. We even know that the Stuarts are related to the House of Orange. The greatest conflicts in the world have been by related families. The British Windsors are connected to the Kaiser.
The War of the Roses and all that.
The War of the Roses is a perfect example.
Sure.
The Russians and the Germans, incredible wars between each other. The royal families are connected by blood.
Sure.
Then we get into the Rothschild connection. I mean, the whole point is that they're all one big pathological psychopathic group who need to be confronted, like I said in the beginning, the light of that they seem to love so much. Let's see how much they love it when it's shining in their eyes, when their skeletons are uncovered. Now is our time. Now is the time to learn this. That's what my work is, motivated by, in short. And it's a fascinating subject. It's fascinating history.
Oh, absolutely, definitely. Me and Michael, we're fast running out of time here, But again, tell people that are interested in getting the book how they most, easily would go about doing that.
Well, it's at the printers now. So the update is that it's at the printers. It'll be ready in a very, very short time, certainly before Christmas. And they can go to irishoriginsofcivilization.com and purchase it there. There's also, I've decided to put the appendices of the book, which is quite substantial. In the end, the appendices are going to become thicker than the book itself because it's a lot of collaborative stuff that I'm being sent from around the world. That's free and online on the same website. We have lots of stuff there on the Minoans, the Cretans, the discoveries of, like I said, these other authors who've revealed amazing things about the Templars. And I just want to personally thank you, Henrik, for allowing me this time, this particular series of shows, so that we can preview the book and get into some of the areas that I think are personally very important. That people who read the book may not realize this is essential.
Yeah.
These shows have helped to isolate that and bring out these classically, to me, crucial themes. Like the British Israelite concept, like the fact of the corruption of the word Arya, the terrible, terrible corruption that's been done with that word. The idea of the East to West movement, or the West to East movement, which I'm trying to blow holes in the East to West movement, but you can't just say that without proving it.
Sure.
Let's establish what you mean by that. So you've given me the opportunity to do that. We've gone into the whole question of the land bridges.
Yeah.
And some of the areas that I want people to really focus on. And also how these secret societies are connected. And the most important thing, which is the real essence, is that now when people are looking at the pyramid and being told to look at all these secret society symbolisms, they're not going to make the fundamental mistake of going, oh, it's Zionist, it's Jewish, it's royal, it's all of this that's happening. People who have a little piece of it and then run with it, and they may be wrong. We've got to go further than that. It's not just as simple as being Masonic, or Rosicrucian. Don't stop there.
Yeah.
Track this back and find out where's its real origin.
That's right.
And this is what I'm so happy to have been able to achieve, because it was a daunting task. There were so many threads to pull together. It seemed like I was very much guided. So I can say that it was a joy to do it, because I felt guided. I learned a lot in the process, And now we're at the printing stage, and people can benefit from this knowledge. And your shows, again, totally indebted to you for helping with that process.
It's been great doing it. I mean, again, thank you so much for, picking out the information and getting the information to us. And